It's a very hard thing as a CEO to very publicly pivot a business. You feel like you failed or you feel like it's mud on your face. So the personal journey of just saying like, hey, I'm gonna make this call and I'm gonna live it and hold it and be open about it. At the end of the day, you have to do hard things and preserve the future of your business.
CEOs spend their days building their businesses, and strategic questions often get pushed to the nights and weekends when they finally have time and space to think about the bigger picture. I call that CEO pajama time. I'm Sari Kaganoff, the CEO of AITSA, where I work alongside health tech leaders at exactly those moments. Come behind the scenes with me to learn from successful CEOs about the critical decisions and inflection points that shape their companies. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CEO Pajama Time podcast. Today, I'm excited to host Naomi Allen, the founder of Brightline. Hi, Naomi. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Sorry.
All right. So let's kick off by just kind of going in the way back machine. Like, tell me, what was the problem that was keeping you up at night that made you say, I'm going to start a company?
I've worked in healthcare my whole career and have been in a number of digital health startups. And when my son was 5, he had an acute onset crisis around mental health. And even as somebody who had been in healthcare basically my whole life, we found it incredibly hard to navigate getting the right support for my son. So, all my experience at McKinsey and Castlight and Livongo, and I was really that mom who couldn't figure out how to get my own child help. And so we sat on wait lists as a family for months, just trying to get him into the right services. And people would just give me provider directories and I would call all the providers, but nobody would have availability. And so our whole family just felt this ripple effect of the fear of him falling further behind developmentally and the stress and it was really keeping me up at night. And so I was very fortunate that Annie Lamont from Oak HCFT reached out and said, hey, we think there's a gap in the mental health space, specifically in pediatrics. We know you've got a lived experience here. And so I left Livongo after we took Livongo public to found Brightline. So really built on the company that I wish had existed for my family when we were going through that journey with my son.
Yeah. And how much time later was it? I mean, were you kind of past that chapter or were you still kind of in it?
It was still pretty fresh. So we were like a couple of years into that journey. So when it was quite interesting, the very first phase of starting the company, we just did a ton of kind of market diligence. We spoke to about 70 or 80 families to just hear what their journeys had been.
Right.
And in some ways, that was so cathartic because it really gave me perspective that our journey, A, wasn't unique, and B, like that actually we were much more fortunate than a lot of families who'd gone through much more challenging experiences. Either, they couldn't afford financially, they couldn't afford to get care out of network, or they were still dealing with very severe repercussions of their kids' mental health. And then, of course, as we were starting all of that, COVID hit. And so I founded the company in 2019. And we were just, 3, 4 months old, just getting our kind of our grounding in terms of the clinical model we wanted to follow when COVID happened. And then all of a sudden we were in a very different set of dialogues with families who were really grappling with all of the challenges around mental health through COVID.
Yeah. So what was the clinical model you were starting with?
Well, the original vision that we built was the idea of hybrid care. And so we were building physical clinics. We were actually in the middle of developing out our first clinic in California. And we really wanted to have multidisciplinary clinics. So kind of one stop
Mhm.
shop for families. So they wouldn't, families often bear the brunt of having to coordinate
Yeah.
across different types of therapy. Many times, families are getting care for the first time for their child and they don't even know what they need. Do I need a therapist? Do I need a psychiatrist? So we were building multidisciplinary clinics that were very tech enabled. And the idea of the tech enablement was, kids could be seen in person, but between their therapy sessions that we would have digital interventions that parents could
Mhm.
essentially practice with kids, almost like digital versions of homework assignments in order to get better clinical gains between therapy
Yeah.
sessions. And then also, kind of what the science behind pediatric mental health tells us is if you can engage parents and caregivers in the care journey, that they can really accelerate the results. And so, imagine a kid that's got anxiety or that's struggling with depression or ADHD. The way that that family engages that child is hugely important to that child's development. And so, we've always been a very family focused model where we have a lot of parent facing services as well. So we were building all of that out. We were deep into the real estate planning and our physical clinic development when COVID hit. And so I was on spring break with my family doing a staycation, and came back from that week and sat down with my team and said, I think that this thing is not going away. At the
Yeah.
time, you may remember sort of early Q1 of 2020, there was such speculation around, this is like gonna be 2 months or this is gonna be forever. And I was meeting with, I met with one of our clinical advisors, Dina Bravata, and she and I pulled together a set of kind of historical data on what had happened, when other viruses had hit there had been periods of prolonged isolation, and we were just seeing this wave of very likely
Yeah.
sustained mental health challenges. And so that's really what led us to really focus on accelerating into the business. So, but it was a very interesting time. I think there was so much uncertainty around the COVID
Yeah.
implications.
So, how do you, as a leader, manage during times of uncertainty? I mean, you have your family at home, literally at home. You have your team. You have to make decisions, like big decisions. So, how did you
Yeah.
navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a fair bit of it was, looking at the data, again, like getting as scientific as we could about the likelihood of profound shifts in
Hmm.
the need for mental health services. He was also meeting with a lot of clinical leaders to understand just the viability of standing up virtual care for children
Hmm.
and youth, and then spending a fair bit of time talking to our clinical leaders about safety protocols. How might we do this? And
Right.
at the time, we had to build protocols for, because we were delivering all the care virtually. If you observe a child that's decompensating, or if you're observing some signs of abuse at home, you're observing that there's, family dynamics, like what are the safety plans if you're seeing a child that has suicidal, ideation or intent?
Hmm.
And so we had to develop a bunch of protocols around safety standards for virtual care for
Hmm.
youth that didn't
Yeah.
exist before. And so a lot of that was meeting with our clinicians, meeting with clinicians that were going through similar pathways. And, thankfully at the time, our chief psychiatric officer had been the medical director for the Yale Child Study Center. And so we definitely tapped into a lot of his network at Yale,
Hmm.
and they were navigating very similar kind of challenges. So we spent a fair bit of time just working through kind of what was clinically viable, and then working with my CTO at the time, talking through kind of the pros and cons of, do we build a very lightweight kind of virtual care stack? At the time, there were these free, kind of almost freebie offerings like Doxy and others that we could
Hmm.
literally stand up virtual care overnight. But if you believe that virtual care is gonna be a big part of your ongoing offering, you wanna build in a more durable way, and so we were
Right.
having those discussions around just, like, the tech stack and the trade-offs. So it was a lot of decisions and a lot of conversations, and obviously keeping our board very
Yeah.
engaged, and so it was, through that set of kind of combination, it's, as most things are for a CEO, it's a combination art and science, right? And so
Hmm.
the science of what the data was telling us, the art of trying to figure out how to stitch together
Yeah.
this, first of its kind virtual care platform for kids and youth. And so, that was really interesting. There just wasn't a playbook for it. And
Right.
and I think the thing that kept fueling us at the time was getting back to those family conversations. We were still talking a lot with families, and we were hearing just how much their sense of crisis was increasing. I think when kids started to be at home more with their parents, parents all of a sudden realized that, A, there was probably a lot of underlying mental health challenges that their kid was struggling with already, that they just, hadn't seen because they hadn't
Right.
been as proximate to those kids. And B, kids were starting to have a lot of new challenges, whether that was
Right.
from, the anxiety associated with COVID, or kind of later in COVID, we started to see a lot of kids that were having reduced movement and less healthy foods, and, having some body image challenges, or early signs of depression. And then just a lot of kids that there was just a lot of friction in the household. And these were these were even in households that weren't going through a meaningful
Yeah.
trauma associated with COVID. There were so many households that had loss of a family member, loss of financial stability,
Right.
meaningful exposure to domestic abuse, right? So the other things that were happening during COVID that were profoundly challenging for child and youth mental health, but even outside of kind of those kind of more traumatic occurrences, just the rapid escalation of challenges that families were facing was pretty profound. And so, from our perspective, we had to flip the model, because we really felt like one of the few organizations that was positioned to really help deliver care at a time of
Yeah.
crisis.
And what did you decide about the tech stack? Did you build your own? Did you cobble
We did
together?
build
What
our
did you
own. We
decide?
did build our own, and
Mm.
and I think in retrospect, so many things are easy to say. Like when you look back, I think we probably over engineered some of our tech stack.
Mm.
We probably could have done a little bit more off the shelf. But at the time, most of the EMR platforms didn't really have like a very strong API set of
Mhm.
wrappers around them. And so we took an off the shelf EMR and we built our own kind of hub and spoke tech stack around that. That was the kind of the connective layer between
Mhm.
the off the shelf systems that we purchased. And so that was a pretty big build, a pretty big lift for us. And I think over the course of kind of a couple of years, as virtual care became a more of a dominant modality, we did see an evolution of tools that had a lot more API enablement and connectivity between the tools. And so we've slowly been sort of migrating over to a more
Yeah.
modern tech stack. And obviously now with AI, we're sort of revisiting every decision we've ever made around our technology and looking at it with a new lens. But yeah, at the time we really decided that we thought virtual care was here to stay for us as a business and for the industry at large, and therefore leaned into to building out a number of tools in
Mhm.
addition to having some off the shelf technologies.
So, a couple directions we could go into, but, maybe we'll do that. I'll take the bait. So AI is changing the tech stack, and so
Mm,
how do you as a leader, like, what was that minute where you were like, did it come as a rush, like, suddenly tipping point, or was it more of like a creeping sensation, like, "Oh, we really need to revisit?" Like, how did that journey happen over the last couple of years, and how do you go
yeah.
about making those changes?
I'd say for me, it was sort of creeping in, and then it really hit me pretty hard. So a couple of our leaders, our product leader, Vicky Marr, some of our engineering leaders had been saying that, their teams were getting nervous that they didn't have enough AI skilling. And they were, sort of the buzz within the product and engineering and design community was that AI was going to take away all the jobs. And so, that the conversation started initially with just this sense of like, hey, we need to make sure that our team's skills are relevant for the future
Mhm.
development cycles and what they need to do. And so we were starting to have that dialogue a little bit. And then I was just doing some sort of looking at other companies that were starting to pop up on the fringes around AI enablement for RCM and charting and I think some of the listening tools that can reduce friction and stress for clinicians. And then I sat down and I did a few just product demos of some of those tools to see like what the capabilities were. And then we had an executive team offsite where we brought in a leader from Anthropic who talked a little bit about use cases that they were seeing of healthcare and specific
Mhm.
healthcare care delivery companies. And prior to that executive meeting, I was doing a bunch of reading about kind of what's the role of leadership in a world of AI, and some of the articles I was reading were really thought provoking because they basically said, look, most organizations are going to end up giving their team some form of AI tooling, right? So people are going to
Mhm.
start to use AI in very basic ways, but if you
Yeah.
want to really think about like transformative change in your business, it kind of has to be topped down. Like the CEO really has to lean in and say, this is going to
Yeah.
be a big part of how we spend our time. This isn't just going to be a couple of engineers at the fringe doing this. And so I directed about a year and a half ago, I directed an ELT offsite where we brought this leader in from Anthropic. We really started to talk about it more fundamentally and set the course on each of our executives, also looking at how they might use AI within their department. So whether that's, our talent
Right.
acquisition function or marketing or our legal
Mhm.
team. And so we started to have a much more active dialogue around it and started to put more roadmap time in specifically for our
Mhm.
product offering. And so that we started about a year and a half ago. And I will say, it continues to be, a lot of how we talk about just, how we make sure the team is actively using
Yeah.
AI. At the time, like a year and a half ago or so, there was also like shame associated with it. I don't know if you remember this phase where people were like, I use ChatGPT or I use Claude to like
Yeah.
build this thing. I don't want to tell anybody. And so, we also just had to like blow the doors off of that and be like, hey,
Right.
it's great. Like go build your decks with Claude or go, use, and I started kind of, very publicly using AI. So I would tell my team members that, look, your performance review, I fed all the feedback into Claude
Right.
and like or into ChatGPT and like, this is an AI enabled set of performance review materials. And so, I think there's just like leadership signals that you have to
Yeah.
really be proactive around, in addition to obviously the blocking and tackling of figuring out kind of the roadmaps, the tools, and all that good
Yeah.
stuff. So I'd say we're still early in that journey. We're definitely not, it's active discussion that I'm having
Mhm.
with our new CEO, with Carrie, our CEO that stepped in a few months ago, and our engineering team. We're bringing in some outside folks to help advise that. So, but I do think that it's, absolutely transformative. And, we're thankfully in a position where we won't have to fundraise, hopefully ever again. But I think that the companies that are going to get future funding or, be strong M&A targets or be strong IPO targets have to have like such like really strong evidence that they are being as lean and effective as possible. And I think AI is the only way, it's the only way forward to do that. Like we're never going to be a company that believes that we don't need live clinicians. Like we firmly believe that it's, technology enabling our people and that people are the way that we can deliver the best care that we can for kids and families. But like the journey of getting that enablement is I think paramount for us.
So take me back. Okay, so we get through COVID, you become more virtual. I'm gonna sneak preview, or maybe you can tell us, but at some point later on in your journey, you pivoted back to more of an in-person. So walk us through
Yeah.
like what happened, what changed, what happened in those intervening years.
So 2020 was the year that we decided to kind of pivot towards virtual. And when we made that move, it became clear that originally we had just planned to be in building our physical clinics initially in California and this sort of like slow expansion state by state. But when we moved to virtual, we said, gosh, if we're virtual only, we could stand up more states sooner than later. And so we started just gradually talking to employers that I had sold to either at Livongo or Castlight or that were just in our network. And I think the resounding feedback from the employers came back of like, hey, we definitely are seeing our employees struggle with their kids' mental health. The Lears and the Springs and our EAPs aren't really built for that. They're really built for adult care. They haven't figured out the protocols to,
Mhm.
treat kids safely and like all the infrastructure around parental consent and how do you deal with all that. So we were hearing that from employers and they were saying, but we don't really want to offer this just to employees in 3 states. Like, if you're gonna have an
Yeah.
employer solution, we want you to really focus on being as broad, geographically as possible. So we embarked on that journey to become a 50-state care model. And so that's a lot of what we were working on in 2021. And at the same time, we were hearing, we were running a cash business, a DTC business, just to kind of continue to provide services through that build. And we were hearing from a lot of families this narrative around, well, I don't think my kid really has like clinical anxiety or depression, but they're struggling. They need some
Uh,
support. And so we also built out a coaching service line for subclinical needs. And so
mhm.
2021 was a huge year for us just in terms of that expansion, getting the coaching function stood
Yep.
up. We built a digital set of interventions that we call Connect, and so we ended 2021 with a kind of a three offering model that we called Connect, Coaching, and Care. And we were well on the pathway to being a 50-state care model, and we were developing a lot of in network relationships with health plans. And so that's when we really started to see a pretty hefty acceleration of
Mhm.
employers. So we went from 9 employer customers at the end of 21 to about 430 by the
Oh
end of
wow.
2023. So like really rapid acceleration. And
Yeah.
folks as big as like Amazon and Costco were customers all the way
Mhm.
down through like these tiny mom and pop shops. The challenge for us was in the midst of that hefty growth and acceleration, those employers were also scrambling, just trying to get all the other virtual care kind of systems and tools in place at the same time because of the need, that sort of rapid rise in virtual care. It's so, although we built out this incredible platform of customers, we were competing for marketing kind of space to drive awareness of the
Mhm.
platform with all of the other virtual care companies that they had brought in.
So like within their employee population, you're saying
That's
like
right, within their employee
okay.
population. So great example, like, we had an incredible team at Amazon, like, I think their clinical leaders are truly phenomenal, Krista Koo and Beth and that whole team, and they were paying us a platform fee to deliver services, but we were only able to get marketing and awareness to the Amazon employees, like, twice a year. Like, they did a big
Mhm.
launch announcement, and then it was, like, 6 months later, we were gonna show up on, like, the Amazon benefits portal, and so we just couldn't get enough visibility to drive enough utilization into the offering, and so, although we had this incredible roster of customers, the demand just wasn't moving fast enough to drive the economics of the
Mhm.
business, and so we took a step back and basically, both because that employer model wasn't driving the growth, and obviously we were maintaining a very expensive 50-state therapy team,
Yeah.
commercial sales team, marketing functions, client success, all of that stuff that you do when you have an enterprise business. And we took a step back and sort of said this, like, there were a handful of customers that we were really driving like strong unit economics against, but the vast majority of them we really weren't driving strong enough, repeatable unit economics. And so that sort of analysis happened in mid 2023. And we had a couple of really good partnerships that were emerging in early 24 with Teladoc and Accolade and Optum and others. But the sales cycle, like we got this partnership deals underway, but
Mhm.
the sales cycle wasn't fast enough in terms of the growth of those customers. And those companies were also having their own challenges in terms of unit economics. And so we just made the call in sort of mid 24. I said, look, I think we need to go back to our roots. We were also hearing and seeing a lot of data that specifically kind of post COVID for child and youth mental health. More families wanted their kids to be seen in person.
Uh,
Virtual care continues to be a very strong offering, and a lot of families prefer to have that in person. So, we did the analysis and we said, okay, look, we've got some really great health plan partnerships. We've got a set of employer customers that have density in key markets like New York. At the time, I raised our Series C in early 2022, and Northwell joined. And so we had a really strong potential for a partnership with Northwell, and so we picked New York as our first geography,
mhm.
and decided to keep virtual care. So we still have quite a large volume of businesses virtual, but to layer in the physical clinics. And then we
Mhm.
have still a really, healthy, strong coaching business that we run for subclinical support. So it's been really interesting. I think, I think we're starting to see that the fruit is getting born from that model. So we're seeing a lot more volume of our families being seen in person. Adding in-person clinics also allowed us to move into some new service lines that we felt were harder to deliver virtually. So a lot
Mhm.
more, ADHD care for younger
Yeah.
kids. We stood up a psychological testing, autism testing
Mhm.
service line. That's really, that type of
Yep.
testing for younger kids is really better delivered in person than it is virtually. So the physical clinics have allowed us to be more expansive in terms of the higher acuity care and some of the testing services that we also wanted to deliver to really continue to expand our care model.
Yeah. So, does that mean you, like, turned down some of those 400 customers? Like, you said to them, "We're just not doing this anymore," because yeah,
That's
it's
right.
okay. That
That's right.
must
We
have
went
been
back to them. It was tough. It was really tough. And it wasn't just the customers, but it's the relationships with the benefit consultants. It
mm,
was our health plan partners. Like we had people who, to their credit, really advocated for us and were huge believers in Brightline. And many of them continue to really advocate for us. We have, still very strong relationships and partners, but it was a hard set of conversations. And, I think the trickiest thing was the timing of it because we really made the decision, around Labor Day of 2024, so September, and we had to act quickly because employers were about to send out their open enrollment
right.
materials in October, and so, both pivoting the team, communicating this to the team, pivoting the team, winding down operations in a number of states, partnering through that with the employers. Then we had to do
Yep.
member notifications. We had to really focus on retaining our clinical staff, even for the states that we were winding down operations in, so that we could continue care for those members till the end of their
Mm,
care journey with us. And so there's this huge kind of tension and dynamic around, you're winding down a big portion of the business, but you need to retain the team and keep them on
yeah.
board to deliver safe and effective care so that, it pains me when I see these companies that pivot and then they don't have the appropriate kind of process and infrastructure around
Yeah.
safe and effective care. just we didn't feel like we felt like that was paramount for us, that we had to,
Yeah.
first and foremost, ensure that our members had safe and effective care through the end of their care journey. So that was a huge kind of forefront for us, was making sure that
Yeah.
we protected that relationship, that care journey. But yes, it all had to come together in about a 4-week span. So that was a very intense phase for
Yeah.
the business.
So walk me through the decision process leading up to that. So you obviously were like was that also quick? Was that longer? You were clearly seeing signals. Like who did you talk to? What did you do? Like
Yeah.
what happened there?
So I had a really incredible chief of staff, Emma Schaefer. I'll give a shout out to her. She's phenomenal. Um, and leading up to a board meeting, we had had a CFO who I asked to like really deep dive on our unit economics, like what's working, what's not working, clinician
Mhm.
utilization, segmenting our customers, and then I had a chief of staff that put together like a really awesome synthesis of a lot of that data. And we looked at it, we said, oof, there's a cluster of customers that are really performing well, and here's kind of what the nature of those customers looks like. They committed to marketing not twice a year but 5 times a year, and
Mhm.
they're committing to marketing in multiple ways, print, media, digital, etc. So,
Yep.
um, but here's the long tail of customers that these guys are kind of in the middle. They're kind of maybe doing once or twice a year, and we may be able to get to nudge them to be able to do more. These guys are really underperforming and not doing much. And so at that time, we then redirected our team to say, like, this tail of people that are doing nothing, we're gonna just ignore them. We're not gonna give them any client success
Mm.
support. We're not gonna badger them to do more for us. We're gonna take this group in the middle, and we're gonna really try to upgrade that engagement model with them and really focus on, I think it was like
Yeah.
40 or 50 clients. And so we restructured our whole client success team around that. We set KPIs around that. We measured it weekly. We did it, we really focused a lot on that sort of upgrade model, and at the same time, we were trying to architect these deeper partnerships with the accolades and
Mhm.
the Teladocs of the world, et cetera. So we ran that process for about 6 months and just
Mhm.
watching the data week over week of like, what are we seeing? What's the yield? What's the likelihood that we
Yeah.
can transform enough of this business? And then we saw the results of that kind of fruit coming in Q1 of 2024. And so that was just a very like data driven approach, like full transparency. I was having very active conversations with my board to say like, these are the KPIs I'm looking to hit. And then in Q1 and Q2 of 24, that's when we were really trying to iron out the details of the partnerships with Optum, with
Mhm.
Accolade, and with Teladoc. And so I had sort of negotiated, for lack of a better word, with my board that if we didn't see certain results by Q2 of 24, that we would initiate a wind down process. And so in Q2 of 24, what was clear was that we weren't seeing the commercialization of
Mhm.
although we had signed the Accolade Livongo
Right.
relationships, we weren't seeing the commercialization pull through fast enough. And then Optum brought in a new CEO to their behavioral health business and put the brakes on our contract, our partnership with them. So
Mhm.
that was really kind of the beginning of the discussion. So, since sort of June, July timeframe, I was starting to envision what that wind down and transition would look like. And then, the board, to their credit, really said, like, look, you're the CEO, you're in the seat, you got to make a call. And we were also seeing at the time just the continued deterioration of the fundraising environment, and
Mhm.
so I was definitely feeling the weight of the burn in the business for
Yeah.
carrying that enterprise cost, that OpEx, and so I started to do some work of just, by myself, like, not engaging even anyone else in the team, not my CFO, nobody. I started to pull up our kind of spreadsheets of burn and our, kind of what if analysis. Okay, so, like, what if, can we take 20 or 30% of burn, out if we just move away from this small cohort of customers? We still keep the 50
Mhm.
state care model. We still keep the employer space. And so just doing a fair bit of just scenario
Yeah.
analysis, working through like what would be the ways to kind of stabilize the business economically, and came to the conclusion that there wasn't enough there, that I couldn't squeeze enough
Mhm.
out while still maintaining the 50 state care model. And it was going to be, at risk of really like running into a lot more burn. And so approached the board, and they were incredibly supportive. And like so many things, I have I have an incredible board. Actually, I guess I'm now the chair of that board, and Carrie's our CEO. So Carrie has an incredible board. I could brag on our board, but I think they really gave me the space to do the analysis, to think through the decisions, but also they were very clear that they were concerned and
Yeah.
that, that the market, that the financial, the fundraising environment was tough, that we should fully expect that, we would not be successful. We had to go raise money if we burned through our Series C, that
Mhm.
we would be in a tough position. And so I took that advice very seriously and had lots of conversations with them through
Yeah.
that journey, and then ultimately, came to the conclusion, and then we had to act very quickly. So, I think it's so easy to look back and think about what would you do differently, and I think it would have been nice to have made that decision a few months earlier in
Yeah.
2024, so that we would have had more time to operationalize and also more time to kind of talk our clients through that, talk our health plan partners through it. So
Yeah.
it was a crunch period, but ultimately I think the decision process was very thorough and very thoughtful, and came
Yeah.
to the right conclusion. So
And it sounds like there's almost a process. It sounds like in both situations we've talked about, there's this like inkling that something's off. Then you go and do a whole bunch of research, deep dives, get the data, really explore how it's changing, what's happening. And then there's suddenly conviction of like, wait, now I know. It's all come clear. And then you act quickly. Does that sound about right?
yeah, that's right. It's interesting. Rob Siegel, a professor at Stanford, wrote a book called Systems Leadership, and in that book, I talked with him a bit about it's. I've always been both a very internal and external CEO, and what I mean by that is, at McKinsey, I learned this skill of like talking to like 50 experts and
Yeah.
distilling down like what are the key themes from those conversations. And so, one of the things I'm really fortunate in my career is that I have a lot of other CEOs that I could go talk to and, like, "Hey, what are you
Hmm.
seeing out there? And how are you thinking about operating your business? And are you seeing," and certainly we've had incredible partnerships with health plans, and, my research team allowed us to pull together some data about how members and patients were thinking about navigating decisions for their kids' mental health. And so it was both a very set of external conversations with other
Hmm.
CEOs, with our partners, with doing consumer research, but then also a fair bit of just internal work and internally looking at
Yeah.
my spreadsheet, thinking about the team, thinking about the OpEx, and then also the personal journey, right? Like it's a very hard thing as a CEO to very publicly pivot a business. You feel like you failed or you feel like it's mud on your face. So the personal journey of just saying like, "Hey, I'm gonna make this call and I'm gonna live it and hold it and be open about
Yeah.
it." I really wanted to be open and write about why we made the pivot, and I did that writing partly because I wanted, we were laying off a big portion of staff, and I wanted people to know that that staff was incredibly talented, that they
Hmm.
weren't being laid off because of their underperformance. They were being laid off because we were pivoting the team. But also, I do feel at this stage in my career, a lot of people look at serial entrepreneurs and talking about pivots and talking about inflection points publicly. I think it's a real gift to the
Hmm.
entrepreneurial community,
Yeah.
because I think it's so easy to kind of look at companies and think everything's running perfectly, and and I'm really proud of the way we've recovered and built and grown through that. But it was a really hard phase, and I think it's just important. It's an important thing for CEOs to say out loud that some phases of business building are really hard and messy, and there aren't
Yeah.
clear paths forward. So it was important to me that I, like, really own that and live and talk about it very publicly.
Yeah. So tell me about the team that stayed behind, right? So
Mm.
you have to come to work the next day, or I don't know exactly how the dynamics worked, but then you have to be like, okay, we're a lot smaller, we're doing something different, but you still have to energize people and keep them on the journey. Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think that was frankly, like, one of the hardest things, and, I spent time, like, individually with each of my executives having the conversation of like, "Hey, do you have this in you to, like, wind down operations and,
Mhm.
potentially, like, wind down a chunk of your team and then build a much scrappier, smaller thing, and here's the vision of kind of what we're talking about doing," and just asked each of our execs to, like, opt in or opt out, and then also had the very important conversation with each of them around, like, is your skill the right match for
Mm.
a business that's gonna look very different, and here's what it looks like. And so that was really I think, a fundamentally helpful set of discussions. And some of that, my execs, we sort of said it's not the right long-term fit, but I asked them to stay for 6 months to help the transition and help to find their replacement. And so we had a few execs that was a kind of a pre-negotiated outcome for us, and that was really helpful. A couple of execs that said like, this isn't what I want to go do, and they opted out of
Yeah.
the journey. And that was, that was hard, but I think also appropriate. And then a couple that we kind of, turned the corner and then made the decision that they weren't the right fit longer term.
Yeah.
So that was also really tricky. But I think overall we just try to do it with as much humility, grace, transparency, authenticity, love. I tried to treat all of our departing execs with, well, appropriate compensation and structure and ways to
Yeah.
support them. And I'm really proud when I made the decision to step down as CEO and move to exec chair. The team surprised me. They held a going away party, and our chief legal officer, our general counsel, invited back a lot of the execs who had
Oh,
been with
nice.
me on the early stage of the journey, and I was really like honored and proud they showed up for that party. And it was an incredibly sweet moment in time of just acknowledging both, that we had gone through something hard together, but that also that we had built something really enduring and important.
Yeah.
And category defining at a time when families really needed us. And so
Yeah.
I'm very close still to most of the team that's ever kind of been through the Brightline journey, and I'm really grateful for that. It's just an incredible set of people.
Yeah. That's nice. So a couple of things I want to just kind of highlight or ask you about. So one is do you think there was a challenge where there was something kind of cool about being like a national, 50 state company and and then suddenly it's almost like you become smaller, less venture backable in a way when you make that pivot? Did that come into your mind? Was that something you were thinking about? Or that really wasn't a factor?
It was honestly like less on the cool factor and even the venture backable, because again, like we've been so fortunate. We have incredible investors, and
Mhm.
I felt like they would stick with us through the
Yeah.
journey. So it was not that piece. It was much more around like the health plan dynamics, right? So
Yeah.
so we had these very strong relationships with the senior national contracting teams and the strategy teams, and especially the health plans for whom, like an Aetna, where we had some of their biggest customers using Brightline, right? So we just had a really strong set of senior partnerships and health plans, and now it's a very different game. We're working with kind of regional contracting teams, and we're not the big fish in town. We don't have
Uh-huh.
the ear of that huge employer base that's
Yeah.
pounding the table for Brightline. And so I think it's been, a little bit trickier just in some terms of some of those commercial dynamics.
Mhm.
Um, but kind of the trade-off there is we're getting a lot deeper in the markets that we're serving
Mhm.
with health systems, with large
Yeah.
pediatrics groups, with schools that are driving referrals to us. And so there is a very different set of commercial motions. But so no, it wasn't, the cool factor, like whatever, that's the
Mhm.
joy of being a serial entrepreneur, is that at some point the cool factor kind of wears off in general. And so it was less about that, and it was much more just about kind of how do we navigate through those commercial dynamics, to set ourselves up for the business we were becoming,
Mhm.
as effectively as possible. So,
Yeah.
and I think our team did a ton of work there, and I think has done a really nice job of building from what we had to
Mhm.
become the business. And we definitely got feedback. We heard from particularly the benefit consultant community. I think it was really frustrated,
Yeah.
and I think, felt like we'd burned some bridges with their employer clients. And, I definitely, I felt that. I appreciated that had felt hard for a
Yeah.
lot of people. And, at the end of the day, you have to do hard things and preserve the future of your business. And,
Uh,
we don't, we were we were not gonna earn the right to continue to serve families if we didn't make some hard decisions. And
yeah.
so we had to work through that hard phase. So
Yeah, for sure. And it must have been pretty disappointing to think you won the game, right? You had the relationships, you won the clients, and then it didn't materialize in the way that you thought.
and it was tricky, right? It's like I also, when we know a lot of the leaders, these benefit leaders, and so many of them genuinely believed that what we were providing was important, and they loved our
Mhm.
offering. and yet, like, we couldn't get more skin in the game with them, and so it was like a really, like you can't threaten the benefit leaders and tell them like, "Hey, I'm gonna have to pull the plug if you don't, kind of give
Right.
us a little bit more opportunity." But how do you say that in a way that, you know,
Mhm.
we're like really trying to tell you here what we need is a minimum of these 4 to 5 touch points, and so
Right.
it was a tough dance, and we have an incredible client success team, a gentleman, Gary Alpert, that led that function for us. It was just he's such an incredible human, and I think really led those dialogues very effectively, and it
Mm.
just couldn't get enough
Yeah.
leverage quick enough, so
So, kind of taking a step back as you think about that experience and where you're building now, any like big lessons learned or kind of aha moments that you think are helpful to share with other entrepreneurs?
I think, it's interesting. This is so counterintuitive. Actually, what I think is nice is that the market is now so much more calibrated around like scalable growth and unit
Uh-huh.
economics that I think that the current batch of entrepreneurs had this lesson like very deeply embedded in their DNA. But at the time, like 2 or 3 years ago, there was like this grow at all costs kind of
Mm.
mentality. And I think that the lesson that I learned the hard way is like some customers are not good for your business and some growth is not
Yeah.
good for your business and some contracts you have to like look at with a much harder lens and say like I can't make this work and like and have the courage to walk away from things
Uh-huh.
and to and to be really like clear-eyed about what parameters do and don't work.
Yeah.
And in the mindset, there was so much of a phase in the kind of 5 or 6 years ago of like, you could take bad deals and sort of
Uh-huh.
outgrow them, and I think that that's just not always true, and I think the other piece that was and is still hard for me as a very mission-oriented leader is that, like, mission doesn't trump unit economics, it just doesn't, and so,
Mm.
as
Yeah.
much as you want a business to be healthy and thriving, like, and believe that what you're doing is good for society, is a company that needs to exist,
Yeah.
is an important, like, innovation, right? Like, very proud of our innovation of having a national coaching function, having this set of digital interventions, like, what we've done and the outcomes that we've demonstrated across our offering are incredible, and, if it doesn't work economically, you just can't sustain it, and
Yeah.
so I do think that sometimes, mission-oriented companies end up fuzzy on how critical that unit economics piece is. And it's really critical to surround yourself with people who are both mission oriented and like very hard nosed on the operations that drive the results for the business. So that's a tough balance to strike, and I think that that's something that I've learned a lot about the last 7 years.
Any myth busting? Anything you hear people tell entrepreneurs you're like, not that.
Well, I've spoken about this publicly before, and I've talked to a bunch of CEOs about this where they're very hung up in like co-founder dynamics, right? And so
Uh-huh.
what I've tried to share with the team is like or with other CEOs is like the co-founder stuff is real. Like it's important if you're going to co-found a company that you've got good dynamics. But like, man, early board members can also make or break, right?
Mm.
Your seed investors, your Series A investors. I'm so grateful that we've had the support of Annie and like Annie and Billy at Oak and my early investors, Emily at Threshold, Ben at GV, like those early investors, because you're going to have pivots and twists and turns. And man, we've had such an incredible supportive board. And I think at every fundraise, I was fortunate enough to have enough term sheets on the table that I spent a lot of time just on like getting to know the
Uh-huh.
investors, specifically like the individuals, and making sure that they were a fit for the board I wanted to build and they were a fit for my
Mhm.
personality and how I like to lead. And so I think it's, and then the kind of first 10 employee dynamics are, I think, just as
Mhm.
important. And so, sort of this myth of like the co-founder dynamic is make or break. I don't think it's true. I think it's that full set of early investors,
Yeah.
that set of like first 10 team members that sets
Yeah.
so much of the culture and so much of the pace of the company. So maybe that's the bigger myth that sometimes I think people
Yeah.
lose sight of.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Naomi. I really appreciate your kind of going down memory lane. I know it's not always been easy, but I think hopefully bright line's in a good spot, and you're
Yeah.
kind of on this new phase of your journey as well.
Thank you. It's super fun to talk about it now because we've come out the other side of it stronger, and I'm
Yeah.
really, incredibly enthusiastic about our new CEO, Carrier Work, who's doing great work. So yeah, it's as hard as it is to talk about it, it's important to talk about it, and we come out the other side with an exciting future ahead. So thanks for taking the
Yeah.
time.
Awesome. Thank you.